I am your mirror. I have been since time began.
And so this evening we have a distinguished moderator and a group of panelists who will talk to you about the importance of why comprehensive sexual education is necessary for as we move forward in the battle against HIV and making sure that we're being inclusive of the youth who are affected and infected with HIV, and also for there to be a full understanding for the adults to know what is going on, as we're going, as we're aging, or some of us are aging. Like you're moving. I know, right?
Speak for yourself.
I know. I'm speaking for myself as I'm aging out and not fully in touch with what's going on in the clubs and what's going on here and there, and what are some of the challenges that are faced currently in the school system, what's going on in the streets, and what's going on in your social life.
I just want to tell people that, before I was elected to the New York City Council, I was a New York City public school teacher for 25 years. I don't know how I put up with it. Specifically because the issues that I fought for as a New York City public school teacher had to do with LGBT rights and AIDS education. I came out as an openly gay teacher in 1992. Well, I had always really been out, but the school they didn't talk about it too much. Although one time one of the presidents of the Parents Association gave me a makeup case for Christmas. So I thought she guessed it, but I wasn't quite sure if she was sending me a hint of what she was doing. But in 1992 I came out as an openly gay teacher on the front pages of Newsday in response to an attempt to teach a curriculum of tolerance, because there had been all these hate crimes going on throughout the city. An African-American man was run out onto the Belt Parkway and killed. Another African-American man was killed in Bensonhurst. And a young man named Julio Rivera was killed in Jackson Heights by 3 white supremacist skinheads out hunting, and those were the words that they used for a homo or a homeless person to kill. And we came up with this curriculum designed to teach tolerance of all of New York's diverse population, 3 pages of which dealt with LGBT families, and it created this uproar over the city, and actually, in the end, the chancellor got fired from his position. But part of that fight was also the fight over sex education and AIDS education at the time, and GMHC was in the forefront of that battle as well. And I'll tell you, it was really important. At that time, my school board president, because they used to have local school boards dealing with smaller districts, not the general school board that we have now that covers the whole city, although they have that in places where we also had these smaller school boards, had forbidden any distribution or any contact of school officials with GMHC. Because my school board president sent one of her students into a GMHC event where that student was able to secure condoms and dental dams at 13 years old. And she thought this was absolutely the most horrible thing in the world that you could do. And so I went to a school board meeting and I took the AIDS Walk poster, I put a lot of tape on it, and I ran up to the front of the room and I posted it up there, and it was a major violation of school policy. They came, they took me out all 4s, and dumped me on the sidewalk somewhere, because I did this horrible thing by posting the AIDS Walk New York flyer in a public school in District 24. Their approach to AIDS education in those days was that they had to have a special teacher come into the classroom, because the regular classroom teachers, although we're trained in every other area, they felt were not trained enough to be able to deal with the topic of AIDS. And the way that they were teaching AIDS up to 5th grade was to tell children that the means of transmission for AIDS was blood to blood, not sex at all. And that, so they said, well, as an example of blood to blood, they said, when you make blood brothers and you prick your fingers and you put them together, that's how you can get AIDS. So we had to sit in the classroom and listen to this as this went on, and I'm like, but my kids were smarter than the teachers. Because one little girl raised her hand and she said, can't you get AIDS from having sex? And the teacher freaked, she's like, oh my God, but we can't talk about that here, So I tell you this little bit of history because although we have come a long way, in many ways we really haven't come a long way. And that very same school board, District 24 in Queens, is rejecting the chancellor's new curriculum all over again. It's a repeat of history that's going on. And the chancellor's curriculum is decent. I think there are areas for improvement, but the fact that he's making it mandatory and not allowing people to opt out is a very good thing, a step in the right direction, I think. But yet, that same school board is doing the same thing. And I gotta tell you, it's really the politics of that school board, it's really not the people who live there, because I think the overwhelming majority of people want their kids educated, specifically because they want their kids to be educated about how not to contract the HIV/AIDS virus. So I commend the work that you're doing. I think that this is a fantastic topic. It really deserves a lot of discussion. And after the discussion, we need an action plan about going out to school boards like 24 and saying, this is unacceptable. Those kids in District 24 need this education, perhaps more than some of the other areas where you have teachers who take the initiative and do some of this stuff on their own. But anyway, it's great to be here. I'll be here for a little while. I just want to say congratulations and thank goodness we have GMHC. Thank you.
I just saw the CDC numbers about the 25% increase in HIV transmission among 15 to 19-year-olds in the last 5 years. And here we are in 2012. We're having the same discussions. We're talking about the same risks that young people face, and the same intolerance, and the same indifference and refusal to take decisive action. So there's a lot, and I want to kind of set some realistic expectations for what we can do from starting at 6 o'clock going to 7:30. We are not going to be able to have marching orders when we leave here. What we should have when we leave here is a commitment to learn and do more, because there's so much. There's so much information. We have a wealth of resource right here at this table, but there are other tables around the city and around this country where this discussion needs to be had, and it needs to be had with some urgency. The HIV/AIDS curriculum, as an example of a curriculum, the New York City public school system has a number of, it's curriculum rich. But the HIV/AIDS curriculum in particular has been in place since 1987, and as recent as 2006, we were still dealing with increased HIV infection rates among young people. This is the New York City public school system that has 1 million kids, responsible for 1 million kids. If we don't point out that it's a problem, that there isn't a reliable, comprehensive sex ed curriculum that incorporates recent knowledge, current information, scientifically sound information about how young people can protect themselves, we are doomed to continue this fight against HIV, against STDs, against teen pregnancy. Or we can let Jersey Shore educate them, right? You can't get an STD or you can't get pregnant in a jacuzzi. I mean, this is where our young people are getting information. This is in the time and age of the internet. I have an almost 16-year-old who asked me on behalf of a friend if I could buy her a pill. I don't know if she wanted a birth control pill, aspirin, whatever. And the issue is we have young people who are sexually active but still feel like they can't talk about what they're doing, right? We need to break down the silos of where young people live. We need to be real about what sexuality is and this nonsense about who screws who and how they do it. And we need to talk about the real health risks that are out there facing young people. And we cannot be forced to select between the different threats. There's youth violence, there's general overcrowdedness in the school system, there's lots of issues. But we cannot accept that we have to choose and deprioritize what we're going to address. Here, on sexual health, on HIV, and our young people of color in particular, there are things that we can do. But as people have heard me say, if you're going to be an advocate, it's not one stop. You get in it, and you advocate, and you continue, and you don't stop. There is no the end. That's why I am here as a GMHC employee and a former GMHC employee advocate since 1992. I will continue this work until it's over.
So SIECUS is a 48-year-old national organization whose mission essentially is to affirm sexuality as a natural and healthy part of living. I always joke that if I worked at the American Lung Association, I wouldn't need to remind people that breathing is a natural and healthy part of living. But for those of us who work on sexuality issues, it's just a little bit more controversial. Yes, and part of what we're really excited about moving forward with is really changing the dialogue around sexual health and well-being. Oftentimes, and especially really in the last 20 years, when we talk about sexual health and when we talk about sexuality, it's really been in a medical context and in a public health context. We've really been talking about it in terms of preventing, and when we do sexuality education in terms of what I call disaster prevention, right? We want to prevent teen pregnancy, we want to prevent HIV, we want to prevent sexually transmitted infections and diseases, we want to prevent violence, all of those things, instead of promoting health, or promoting, oh my gosh, well-being, or promoting the reason why lots of people have sex, pleasure. Oh my gosh.
Did you say that?
I did, and if you can't talk about Children of the Rainbow, which I cut my controversy teeth on when I first came into the sex ed world, you certainly can't talk about pleasure. Or promoting pleasure, talking about pleasure. We have to pretend that sex is this terrible, terrible, terrible thing until you turn 18 or something, or you get married or something. I'm not, depending on who's defining it.
One of the difficulty is having people who've been trained as an English teacher to teach about anal and oral and vaginal intercourse.
I think you're the only principal I've ever heard who said that. I just have to note that.
Which technically we're not supposed to talk about until they hit 9th grade.
This is part of what we're talking about in terms of breaking down silos. It's a principal who sees the need of the community and integrates it into the schooling experience. And that's really kind of the challenge that we're talking about. It's not that he's an HIV warrior, advocate, or pioneer. It's the need that's presenting itself. And so to that end, you are obviously not the only school in the South Bronx, but do you, I want you to kind of speculate or give an informed perspective for us about what other principals in the district or in the community, why they wouldn't take on your approach. What would be the barriers or concerns?
Well, it's a huge system. So there's over 1,500 schools, which means there's only over 1,500 principals. There's tens of thousands of teachers and 1.1 million kids. This mandate is, I guess it's a mandate, although it's not, there's no mandated curriculum for it. There is a recommended curriculum. So when I got the letter from Chancellor Walcott, I had to research these recommended curriculum on my own. I had to look at them. I have to purchase them on my own. And so there are roadblocks just around money, time, and resources. This isn't, in this country, education is becoming very narrowed around math and English. Sort of the whole child is really being left behind. And because these, I get a survey every year of about 50 items that I have to do, compliance items.
Yeah.
The HIV curriculum is one box that I click, either I've done it or not, but no one's coming in to check it. So as a principal, you know, I've met lots of principals who probably, if their own personal value is not invested, they may or may not pursue the curriculum. And certainly it's very difficult to deliver it to every student when teachers themselves are uncomfortable and haven't been trained. Sexual orientation comes up in 8th grade, it doesn't come up in 7th grade. 7th grade is gender identity and what is gender. So there's sort of a scaffolding. But questions come up, and then the important thing is as adults, we use what is coming from the kids as the education piece. You don't push it aside, you in fact engage with it there. Because kids need facts. I've never actually had parents upset we were doing the curriculum. In order to offer the curriculum, we do have to offer an opt-out, where parents have to write a letter opting out. I don't send permission slip home. Instead, I put the onus on the parent, whether or not it's a child. And every year we do have, like this year, I have 220 kids in middle school, and there are 4 who have opted out.
Well, hi, I'm Louis. I went to Catholic school from 1st to half of 9th grade. When I finally realized that I was gay and came out about it, I was sort of ostracized from Catholic school and the Catholic Church, which obviously had no sex education program because you're taught that you must, stay celibate till marriage. And especially if you're gay, you're not really that accepted. When I got to 9th grade, it was about the age of 14, 15. And at that point, I was exploring my sexuality already. I had realized that I was gay. I had realized that, I did like other men. And that was something that wasn't spoken about. That was something that wasn't taught in schools, so I had to explore for myself. And especially around the time when I was exploring engaging in sexual activities, I had to do the research on my own. I had to go on the internet, and I was hiding the research that I was getting underneath the rocking chair in the living room. And one day my mother found it and said, "What is this? What are you looking at? What are you reading about?" And I said, I was kind of embarrassed at that point. And she said, "This isn't embarrassing to talk about. We should talk about this stuff." And she sat me aside and talked about it. But it wasn't being talked about in school. And so when I reached the 10th grade, I realized that there was a need for this conversation because I started getting involved in politics and getting involved in places like GMHC and other nonprofit organizations that taught me the need for this conversation and forced my school to start talking about it. I brought the HIV education program into my school and had them, it was not mandatory, as you said, it was not forced on the schools, it was not mandatory, it was not important enough to speak about to them, so they didn't do it. We had an advisory period every day where I made them talk about it. I made them have 5 mandatory lessons. Per the principal, I spoke to the principal. I told her, we need to have these conversations, we need to engage these students in these things from the 6th grade. I was in a 6 through 12. The 6th grade education, like the principal was saying, is very dry. It's very, this and that. It's not very specific. But the fact that they were having those conversations helped them engage in the idea of sexuality and HIV/AIDS comprehension at a young age. And from there, I start to speak about the sexual orientation side of things. I started the Gay Straight Alliance when I was in the 10th grade. And it forced, not really forced, but it created a space for people of different sexual orientations and people who were questioning their sexual orientation to engage in also those conversations, and brought in different guest speakers to speak to them about these things and to educate them more. And so from there, it went on to the parent level and the teacher level. We had the parent coordinator and the teacher coordinator speaking to the teachers and bringing in different groups to speak to them, to educate them further about what was being spoken about in the classrooms, and getting information from the students themselves to see what they wanted to know, what they had questions about, what they were engaging in from peer-to-peer conversations. And it created a space where the conversation was more comfortable. Like, the conversation was able to be had, and it wasn't like hidden. It wasn't that we had to hide what we were talking about or be scared to say what we had to say, because it was so welcomed by our staff and by our students, because they wanted to have these conversations. And even though it wasn't mandatory, it was important to have these conversations, and I made it a point to do that and make sure that it was happening. I think the important thing to understand is that whether the conversations are being had, teacher to student, principal to staff, that the conversations are happening. That these students are engaging in these activities, and the students are thinking about this stuff, and will talk about it with each other, but it's better to have an education process in place to inform them of the real deal, the real statistics, the real information behind it, because they're not getting all the information from each other. I used to bring condoms to school because the condom availability program was like, it was not even there. And allowing it to happen and sort of breaking that barrier between, you know, having condoms in school. They were unavailable. They were unavailable. I could not go to my counselor and say, let me get condoms, because they didn't have them, because it wasn't a thought in their head. And even though they're dealing with people who are engaging in sexual activities from the age of, let's say, 13, you know, it wasn't available. And I made it a point to make everything available, not only the education, but the condoms, but the literature and everything that goes on. The need for this conversation, yes. The young people, my fellow students at that time, were discussing it on their own, but enjoyed talking about it in groups, because you can get other information about other people's experiences, and they may know something you don't know. And sometimes even talking about it with an adult, you get totally different sides of what this really is. And broadening the discussion to an entire school level, or just within small groups, makes a difference. Because when you're pushing it on from a school point of view and not just a peer-to-peer point of view, sometimes it changes the conversation and educates further than sometimes just a me and you conversation. And the need is definitely there, because as they've continued to say throughout this conversation, it's those young people that the rate is going up. In that group, the rate is going up. In those young, you know, 15 to 19. And that's around the time you're 9th to 12th grade. You know, so yeah, no, the conversation is happening, and it needs to continue to happen and be forced to happen, because they need to know the facts and the reality about it.
Now, the New York City public school system, one of the biggest school systems in this country, and you know, even with all of the excitement of the announcement about the sex ed mandate, there are those of us in the room and outside of these rooms who know that there is still a lot of work that needs to be done, and it's beyond just kind of the cute celebrations of new initiatives. You know, many organizations like GMHC are looking at humongous cuts to their HIV prevention budgets, even as we are faced with these statistics, and New York City and New York State almost always drives the national statistics. So we have a lot of challenges. GMHC still has a policy department that stays focused on these issues. I know that there's a lot of work ahead of us, and I guess I would leave us with just the realization, we're talking a lot about young people, but just the general difficulty that we as a generation have. We kind of say one thing and do another. Adults have a really hard time talking about sex education, and one of the studies that I never will forget is that the number of young people who are able to talk to their family members or have a trusted adult that they can go to really talk about sexuality and sex education and get information tend to have lower rates of STDs, and they start sex later. We may have feelings about you know, young people and sex, but we definitely have to kind of look within before we can, you know, as we take on this fight. And it is going to be a fight to keep our young people safe and to give the generations that come behind us a fighting chance. So thank you to GMHC.